Instructor Polith arrived early because he always arrived early, and because his 6 legs carried him faster when he was nervous. And today all 6 of them had opinions about the semester ahead. The classroom was a curved amphitheater built into the inner wall of Tethera's 4th academic ring. Seats designed for no particular species, which meant they were uncomfortable for all of them. The air filtration system hummed at 12 different chemical balances, depending on which quadrant you sat in. It smelled like compromise. Polith had taught conflict mediation across species for 9 years in this room, and he had never once been able to describe what it smelled like to anyone who asked. He set down his materials and ran through the roster one more time. 15 students, 11 species, 2 Keth-crested Velorni, 1 Palesi, 1 Dothari, 3 Vethrani, including, he paused, Kethris Zosal. Poleth's antennae flattened against his skull. The Zosal family had held territory in the Vethrani dominion for 600 years. Their children did not attend the collegium to learn. They attended to be seen attending. And at the bottom of the roster, in a font the system had flagged with a yellow species alert marker that Poleth had never seen applied to a student before. Marin Voss. Human. Earth. Class 7 Deathworld origin. He had read her file. He had read it 4 times, actually. Because the first 3 times, his Mireth pattern recognition kept insisting the data was corrupted. Heart rate ranges that overlapped with industrial machinery. Bone density that shouldn't exist at this calcium availability. A neurological response profile that his training had only ever associated with. He didn't want to finish that sentence, even privately. Students began filtering in. The 2 Valorni arrived together, crests high and shimmering, already performing for each other. A cluster of mid-range herbivore species filled the back rows, Tessith the Palesi among them, her bioluminescent patches flickering in what Poleth recognized as social anxiety. The Dothari student drifted to the far corner, crystalline limbs catching the light, fragile and beautiful, and clearly terrified of being stepped on. Poleth's empathic receptors painted the room in a wash of biometric data he couldn't turn off. Stress hormones here, territorial pheromones there. The low electric hum of the Velorni crests interfering with his instruments. Normal first-day chaos. Then Marin Voss walked in. She was small. That was the first wrong thing. The xenobiology briefs described humans as medium to large bipedal predators, and Poleth had been expecting something that filled a doorway. Marin Voss did not fill a doorway. She was compact, light-haired, and covered in a pattern of brown spots across her nose and cheeks that Poleth's database identified as freckles, benign pigmentation clustering, no defensive function. She carried a bag over one shoulder and a drink container in her other hand, and she looked, more than anything, like she had wandered into the wrong building and was too polite to mention it. She chose the corner seat, not the back, the corner, sightlines to both exits and the instructor's podium. Poleth noted this the way he noted everything, with the quiet dread of someone whose species had evolved specifically to notice when something dangerous was being casual about it. He scanned her biometrics. Heart rate, 72 beats per minute. He checked his instruments. Functional. He checked again. 72. In a room full of 11 species she had never shared air with, at an institution 400 light-years from her home planet, surrounded by beings that outmassed her by factors of 2 to 8. 72. Poleth had once monitored a Golhari combat instructor during a live-fire training exercise. That Golhari, a species literally bred for war over 3,000 generations, had registered 89. Marin Voss was sitting in an orientation lecture with the cardiovascular profile of someone watching rain. The door opened again 10 minutes past the start time, and Kethri Zosal entered, He was enormous. 8 feet of articulated black chitin that caught the light like volcanic glass. 4 arms folded in the Vethrani resting position that Poleth knew was not resting at all, but a display. Look how relaxed I am. Look how little you concern me. Kethries moved to the center of the second row, where 2 smaller students were already seated. He didn't ask them to move. He stood and waited. They moved. Poleth felt the stress spike ripple through the room, like a stone dropped in water. The Palesi's bioluminescence stuttered. The Dothari pulled its limbs inward. Even the Valorni crests dimmed half a shade. He checked Marin. 72. She glanced at Kethris the way a person glances at a clock. Noted, filed, returned to her drink. Poleth began his lecture. He talked about threat signaling, the ways species communicate danger before violence becomes necessary. He kept his voice in the calm instructional register his species was famous for. And he watched his students, and he pretended his antennae were not pinned flat against his skull. He asked each student to share their species' primary threat display. The Valorni described crest flaring. The Vethrani described blade drawing and postural expansion. The Palesi described bioluminescent overload, a blinding flash meant to stun. One by one around the room. Textbook answers, safe answers. Marin's turn. She straightened in her seat. Not much, just enough to indicate she was speaking. Her voice was soft and even and carried perfectly in the amphitheater's acoustics. Humans smile, she said. Silence. Not the productive silence of students processing information, the empty silence of 15 beings who had heard a sentence and found no place to put it. One of the Valorni students tilted its crest. You bare your teeth? As in, a predatory display of dentition? No, Marin said. She was smiling now. It was a small, warm, perfectly friendly smile. We smile, like this. It means we're happy. It means we like you. She paused. It also means other things. She did not elaborate. She picked up her drink and took a sip. Poleth changed the subject with a speed that he would later recognize as panic. The rest of the lecture was uneventful. Students filed out in clusters. Marin left alone, bag over shoulder, drink in hand, same pace she'd entered with. Kethris Zosal watched her leave. Poleth watched Kethris watch her leave. Then the room was empty, and Poleth stood at his podium with all 6 legs locked, and his antennae pressed so flat they ached. He returned to his office, closed the door, pulled up Marin's file on his display. He scrolled past the biometrics, past the physiological data, past the cultural overview sections he'd already memorized, down to a single line at the bottom of the xenobiology brief that he had read 4 times and understood less with each reading. Deathworld species do not display threat signals as warning. They display them as last courtesy. He stared at the sentence. He thought about Marin's smile. He filed a concern report with the Collegium administration. He described the classroom dynamics, the biometric data, the Zosal family's political history, and his professional assessment that the cultural practices exemption had not been written with Class 7 Deathworld species in mind. The report was marked acknowledged within the hour. Not actioned. Poleth closed the file, opened it, closed it again. His office was quiet. The humming of Tethera's gravity panels was the only sound, steady and mechanical, and completely indifferent to everything that was about to happen inside its walls. He left the file open. 3 weeks into the semester, and Marin Voss had a routine. Routines were good. Routines meant nobody had to see her figure things out. She woke at 0500 station time because her body refused to care what the local clocks said. The Earth's circadian rhythm, 24-hour cycle, hardwired into 200,000 years of evolution. Tethera ran on a 31-hour day, and every cell in Marin's body had a quiet opinion about that. She did pull-ups from a structural beam in her quarters. 40, then 50. Then she hung there with her arms burning and her feet dangling 2 inches off the floor, and she felt the wrongness of it. 0.6 G, pulling at her like a polite suggestion instead of a demand. Back home, gravity was a bully. It grabbed you by the spine and said, "Stay down." Here it was a gentle hand on the shoulder. 3 weeks of this kindness, and her muscles were already forgetting what real weight felt like. She'd stolen weight plates from the engineering lab, bolted them to a vest, wore it during her morning routine like a secret. The Collegium's maintenance system kept flagging the missing equipment. She kept moving the plates to different hiding spots. It was the most criminal thing she'd ever done, and it made her feel like an idiot, which was better than feeling like she was dissolving. Breakfast was a private affair. Had to be. Human food was prepared in a sealed kitchen module 3 corridors from the main dining hall, because the smell of cooked protein, specifically the Maillard reaction, the browning of amino acids under heat, the thing that made bacon smell like bacon, triggered a prey-flight response in 4 of the Collegium's enrolled species. Marin ate her eggs alone, in a room that smelled like a diner, and felt like a quarantine cell. She chewed with her mouth closed. She'd learned that one fast. First week she'd eaten a sandwich in the common area. Just a sandwich. The Palesi student 3 tables over had watched her jaw work. The lateral grinding, the tearing, the mechanical efficiency of human dentition processing solid food, and had gone so pale her bioluminescence shut off entirely. Tessif. That was her name. Sweet kid. Marin had apologized 6 times. Tessif had said it was fine. It was not fine. Marin ate alone after that. Classes were manageable. She sat in her corner. She took notes with a metal pen that was heavier than it needed to be because her father had given it to her, and her father did not give light gifts. She spoke when called on. She kept her voice soft. She laughed at the right moments. Carefully, always carefully, because a human laugh that came from the belly registered on Mirith empathic sensors as a predatory vocalization burst. And she'd seen Instructor Polith flinch once during the first week, and had never let it happen again. She was so good at this. In Polith's class that week, they did partner exercises. Simulated territorial dispute. Marin was paired with the Dothari student, Kez, small and crystalline, and so fragile that Marin was genuinely afraid of the air pressure changes from her own breathing. She made herself small, lowered her shoulders, softened her gaze, a thing she'd practiced in the mirror until it stopped looking like a predator feigning sleep. She spoke barely above a whisper. She let Kez lead. She conceded points she could have won. The negotiation was a masterpiece of restraint, and when it was over, Polith marked them both as excellent. Marin caught Polith watching her afterward with all 4 of his eyes in the configuration her xenobiology textbook called distress assessment. She looked away. He looked away. They both pretended. Kethris Osal did not pretend. He'd started 3 weeks ago with glances, moved to comments. By week 2, he was holding court in the common areas, that voice like a cello dragged over gravel, talking about predator species integration and the Collegium's lowered standards and the Brisbane incident. Always the Brisbane incident. The colony war massacre that human politicians had spent 40 years trying to bury, and that the galaxy's xenophobes kept digging up like a favorite bone. He never said Marin's name. He didn't have to. She heard every word. The common areas weren't that big. Kethris knew she could hear. That was the architecture of it. Not confrontation, but atmosphere. Not an attack, but a weather system. He was building a world where her presence was the problem, and he was the reasonable voice pointing it out. It was, Marin had to admit, pretty good work. Her response took a week to plan. She requisitioned ingredients through the embassy supply channel: flour, butter, sugar, vanilla extract, chocolate chips. Transport fees alone, for a kilogram of butter, across 400 light-years, made her embassy allowance weep. She baked at 0300 station time in the sealed human kitchen, alone, in a room that smelled like her mother's house on Sunday mornings. She made 3 dozen cookies. She left them in the common room on a tray with a handwritten note. From Earth. Won't kill you, probably. Most species walked past them like they were unexploded ordnance. The Valorni sniffed from a safe distance. The Vethrani, Kethras's people, didn't acknowledge them at all. But Tessith, the Palesi girl who'd watched Marin eat a sandwich and nearly fainted, Tessith picked one up, turned it over in her luminescent fingers, bit into it. Her bioluminescence went supernova. Every patch on her body lit up in cascading waves of gold and pink. The Palesi expression for, as Marin later learned, extreme sensory delight, bordering on spiritual experience. Tessith ate 3 more cookies in 4 minutes, and told everyone within earshot that humans might be terrifying, but they had somehow turned plant matter and animal fat into a form of edible joy that the Palesi Consortium needed to investigate immediately. It was a small victory. It cost Marin a week's personal funds, and it changed nothing about the way Kethris talked, or the way hallways quieted when she entered, or the way Paleth watched her with 4 eyes full of something she didn't want to name. But Tessith liked the cookies. That night, Marin sat on the edge of her bed. Her quarters were regulation. Bare walls, standard furniture, everything designed for a body shape approximately hers. One personal item on the shelf: a framed photo. Her mother in ambassador's formal wear, dark suit, Earth flag pin, the diplomatic smile that could negotiate water rights in a drought. Her father beside her in marine dress blues, jaw like a door frame, hands like the things that open doors, whether the door agrees or not. Marin picked up the photo, held it. Her mother had told her before she left, "You are Earth's first impression. Everything you do, they'll remember." Her father had said nothing. He'd hugged her at the shuttle port, and his arms had been a cage she didn't want to leave. She set the photo face down on the shelf, picked it up, set it face down again. She lay back on the bed. The ceiling was smooth composite. 0.6 G pressed her into the mattress like a lullaby. Dad would have just hit him. The thought arrived without permission, stayed without apology, and settled into the dark space behind her ribs, where she kept things she didn't look at. She closed her eyes. Sleep came slow. The weight plates sat in the corner, dense and earthbound, the only honest things in the room. Poleth had been dreading this lecture since the semester schedule was finalized. Ritual combat and legal standing. Module 7. It was in the curriculum because the Collegium served 100 species, and at least 30 of them had formalized violence written into their cultural frameworks. Poleth couldn't skip it. He couldn't water it down. He could only teach it and pray to whatever Mirith believed in that nothing in the room caught fire. He stood at the podium and felt all 6 of his legs doing that micro-tremor thing they did when his empathic receptors were picking up something his conscious mind hadn't processed yet. He'd learned to trust the legs. The legs were usually right. The classroom filled, normal clusters, normal chatter. The Valorni preening, the Palesi flickering, the Dothari tucked safely in the far corner. Marin in her seat, corner sightlines, drink in hand, 72 beats per minute, like a clock that had never been wrong. Kethris Zosal arrived on time today. That was the first warning. Kethris was always late. Lateness was the display. On time meant the display had changed. Poleth began. He explained the Vethrani tradition of Keth Sol, the Blade Challenge. He kept his voice in the educational register, flat and informative, stripped of anything that could be mistaken for endorsement or alarm. The Quetzal was ancient, thousands of years old, a formalized dominance ritual in which one Vethrani drew a ceremonial blade in a public setting, declared challenge against another, and the challenged party either submitted, a bowing of the head, a lowering of the chitin crest, or answered physically. A touch of blade to the opponent's shoulder, a nick, a mark that healed in hours on Vethrani chitin, symbolic, controlled, legal within the Collegium, under the Cultural Practices Exemption, Article 9, which stated that enrolled students retained the right to engage in species-specific ritual practices, provided they occurred in supervised academic settings. Polith had argued against Article 9 at 3 faculty meetings. He had been outvoted at 3 faculty meetings. The Vethrani delegation funded 40% of the Collegium's operating budget. Article 9 was not going anywhere. He moved to comparative examples. The Golhari honor grapple, the Tseni scent duel. He was reaching for the Palesi conflict luminescence display when he felt it. Not heard, not saw, felt. His empathic receptors flooded with a chemical signature he had been trained to recognize in his first year as an instructor, and had encountered exactly twice in 9 years of teaching. Both times from Golhari combat students running live simulations. Both times expected. Premeditation. Not anger, not aggression. Something colder, something organized. The specific neurochemical architecture of a mind that had already decided what it was going to do, and was now simply waiting for the appropriate moment to do it. It was coming from Kethris Zo-Sal. Poleth's 6 legs locked. His antenna went rigid. He kept talking. He didn't know what he said. Later, reviewing the recording, he would discover he had repeated the same sentence about Tessini scent glands twice without noticing. Kethris stood. The movement was fluid and unhurried, and beautiful in the way that large predators are beautiful, when they stop pretending to be still. 8 feet of black chitin unfolding upward, forearms spreading slightly, the overhead lights catching each articulated plate like they'd been polished. Which they had. Kethris had prepared. From somewhere inside his formal academic robe, Kethris drew a blade. The Quetzal was a curved thing, single-edged, ceremonial, but not dull. The metal was Vethrani alloy, dark, light-drinking, old. The handle was wrapped in something that looked like leather but wasn't, and it fit Kethris's primary right hand like it had been made for him. It had been made for him. The Zo-Sal family commissioned their children's blades at birth. The room stopped. Not quieted, stopped. 15 students ceased producing sound, ceased shifting in their seats, ceased blinking in some cases. The air filtration system hummed on, indifferent and mechanical. Everything else was gone. Kethris turned to face Marin Voss. He spoke the formal words. Poleth heard them through a ringing in his auditory canals that he would later identify as the onset of a Mireth fear paralysis response, a biological relic from an era when his species had been prey. The words were Old Vethrani, ritual language. Poleth's translator rendered them in flat, bureaucratic, galactic standard. I, Kethris of House Zo-Sal, declare Quetzal upon the one seated. Rise or bow, the blade has spoken. Poleth looked at Marin. She was still holding her drink. He scanned her biometrics. 72 beats per minute. He waited for the spike. The spike that came when any prey class or mid-range species encountered a blade in close quarters. The spike he'd been trained to identify and respond to. The spike that would let him intervene under medical distress protocols and shut this down. 72. 68. His instruments must be wrong. He checked the calibration. Functional. He checked the sensor alignment. Perfect. He ran a diagnostic that took 0.3 seconds and felt like an hour. Marin Voss's heart rate had dropped. Poleth had taught 11 species over 9 years. He had monitored thousands of stress responses. He had seen heart rates spike, plateau, and crash. He had never, not once, not in any species, not in any context, seen a stress response manifest as cardiac deceleration. Hearts beat faster under threat. This was not a cultural phenomenon. This was not a trained response. This was physics, chemistry, the basic mathematics of adrenaline and blood. Marin's heart was slowing down. Her body was not panicking. It was organizing, redistributing, prioritizing. The human sympathetic nervous system. He recalled this from the file. The unredacted file, the one he'd read 4 times, had 2 modes. Fight or flight was the famous one. The one every species knew about. The textbook one. The other mode didn't have a name in Galactic Standard. Marin set her drink down on the desk. The motion was smooth and precise and utterly without hurry. She looked at the blade in Kethras's hand. She looked at Kethras. Her face did something that Poleth's empathic receptors couldn't read, because it wasn't an emotion. It was the absence of one. A clearing. A room being emptied so that something else could use the space. She spoke. Her voice was level. Not forced level. Not performing calm level. Level the way a laser is level. Because deviation was not something it was capable of. Is this governed by your rules or Collegium rules? Kethras had prepared for defiance. He had prepared for submission. He had prepared for tears and for threats and for the intervention of the instructor. Poleth could see this in the Vethrani's biometrics, a cascade of pre-planned responses, each mapped to an expected reaction. He had not prepared for a procedural question. Collegium rules permit cultural practices under, Kethras began. Collegium rules, Marin said. Not a question this time. A confirmation. She said it the way someone checks the safety on a weapon. Got it. She looked at Poleth. Her eyes were brown and steady and ancient in a face full of freckles. Then Marin Voss smiled. Poleth's species could read a smile's muscular composition the way other species read text. The human smile involved 43 muscles in various combinations, and each combination meant a different thing. The social smile engaged the zygomaticus major and the orbicularis oculi, the mouth and the eyes together. Genuine warmth, a real thing. This smile did not reach the orbicularis oculi. This smile was only the mouth. The teeth showed. The eyes stayed exactly as they were. Flat and focused and empty in the way that a rifle scope is empty. Poleth knew there was a human word for this expression. He had read it in the xenobiology brief. A simple word. He couldn't find it. His mind was a white room with locked doors. The word was ready. The room held its breath. The gravity panels hummed. Somewhere in the Collegium's administration wing, a concern report sat in a queue, marked acknowledged, not actioned, collecting digital dust while 11 species watched a girl with freckles smile at a blade. And the blade, for the first time in 10,000 years of Vethrani tradition, seemed like the smaller thing in the room. Marin stood up. She didn't rush it. There was no explosion of motion, no burst from the seat, nothing that the 15 recording devices around the room would later describe as aggressive. She simply stood, the way a person stands when they've decided to leave a restaurant. Casual, complete. Like she'd been planning to get up anyway, and the 8-foot alien with the blade had just given her a convenient reason. She was aware of everything. The layout of the room. Curved amphitheater. 7 meters between her seat and Kethras. 2 exit points. 1 instructor's podium with Poleth behind it. Frozen solid. All 6 legs locked. Antenna flat. The other students. Their positions. Their sizes. The Dothari in the far corner. Crystalline and breakable. The Pilacy to her left. Tessith. Bioluminescent strobing in fear patterns. The 2 Valorni, with their crests dim to nothing. All of this entered her awareness, the way air entered her lungs. It was just there. It had been there since Kethras drew the blade. Maybe since before. Maybe since she'd watched him arrive on time today, and her body had started a clock she didn't remember setting. She spoke to Polith. Her voice came from somewhere below her thoughts, from the calm mechanical place where her breathing had gone slow, and her heartbeat had dropped to a frequency that would have concerned a human doctor and fascinated a human soldier. Instructor. Collegium rules state a challenged party may answer with equivalent cultural practice. Confirmed? Polith's mouth moved. Nothing came out. He tried again. His voice was thin and wrong, and he clearly hated it. Confirmed. Marin reached into her bag. Every non-human in the room flinched, a collective muscular spasm that rippled across 11 species, like wind across grass. Even Kethris shifted his weight, blade adjusting, forearms recalibrating, because the predator was reaching for something, and 10,000 years of Vethrani warrior instinct couldn't ignore that math. Marin pulled out a pen, her father's pen, metal-bodied, earth-manufactured, heavy in the hand, the kind of pen that wrote on carbon copy forms and survived being dropped from 3-story buildings and had a heft to it that made people ask, "Why is your pen so heavy?" And her father would smile and say, "It writes better that way." She held it, not the way a person holds a pen. Kethris saw it. His mandibles clicked, the Vethrani equivalent of a scoff. A pen. She had answered a Quetzal blade with a writing instrument. The tension in the room cracked. One of the Valrani made a sound that might have been a laugh. Kethris's posture shifted from combat-ready to amused, and the amusement was worse than the aggression, because it meant he thought it was over. He thought she was performing defiance through absurdity. A gesture. A protest. The kind of thing a small, soft, cookie-baking creature would do when cornered by something real. He was still thinking this when Marin moved. 3 steps. She walked. Didn't run. 3 steps, straight line, flat trajectory, and each step covered exactly the distance it needed to cover, and not 1 centimeter more. Later, when the recordings were analyzed frame by frame in the Collegium security office, a Golhari technician would note that her stride length was identical on all 3 steps, to within 2 millimeters. This was not something a conscious mind could regulate. This was something a body did when the conscious mind had stepped aside and let something older drive. Between the 2nd step and the 3rd, she did something with the pen. Poles would review the footage 40 times. He would slow it to 1/16 speed. He would overlay motion tracking software designed for particle physics research. He would still not be able to explain how a human hand moved that fast at 0.6 gravity, where every motion should have been slower, floatier, reduced. The pen left Marin's writing grip and arrived at a different grip, point forward, braced against the heel of her palm, in a transition that occupied 3 frames of video. 3 frames at 60 frames per second, 50 milliseconds. The blink of an eye took 300. The pen was at Kethris's throat, not his shoulder. The Quetzal tradition specified the shoulder, the thickest chitin, the place where a blade touch meant nothing, healed in hours, left no trace. Marin had not chosen the shoulder. The pen's tip rested against the ventral seam of Kethris's neck, where the chitin plates thinned to allow head rotation. The softest point on a Vethrani body. The only place where the armor wasn't armor. She knew this. She'd read the xenobiology briefs too. She'd probably read them once. Humans only needed once. Kethris's blade was on the floor. Nobody saw it leave his hand. The recordings showed it later. Marin's free hand, the left one, moving in concert with the right, a motion so efficient it looked like choreography. She hadn't knocked the blade away. She'd pressed 2 fingers against the nerve cluster on Kethris's primary wrist, a point described on page 47 of the Vethrani Xenobiology module, filed under Medical Vulnerabilities, Minor. And his hand had opened on its own. The blade had fallen. The sound it made hitting the floor was small and embarrassing, like a fork dropped at a dinner party. 4 seconds of silence. Marin looked up at Kethris, She had to look up. He was 8 feet of chitin, and she was 5'6" of freckles and her father's pen. The size difference was comical. The room did not find it funny. She spoke. Quiet. Almost gentle. The tone of someone explaining a house rule to a guest who didn't know. On Earth, we don't do ritual. We do finished. She let that land. 1 beat. 2. Your rules let you touch my shoulder. My rules don't have a shoulder option. She removed the pen from his throat. The motion was as controlled as the approach. No jerk, no flourish, nothing for the recordings to dramatize. She clicked the pen. The sound was small and ordinary, and somehow the loudest thing that had ever happened in this room. She put it back in her bag. She sat down, opened her notebook, looked at Polis with an expression that was impossibly apologetic. Sorry, instructor. You were saying? Polith was not saying anything. Polith was standing behind his podium, with all 6 legs locked, and his empathic receptors so overloaded they had simply stopped interpreting data and were feeding him raw noise. The room remained still for a long time. Then it began to recalibrate. Marin could feel it. The calculations being run behind 14 sets of alien eyes. The quiet rewriting of every assumption they'd built about the small human who baked cookies and sat in the corner and spoke softly and smiled. The new math was simple and brutal. She had not been restraining herself out of weakness. She had been restraining herself out of mercy. The cage was never around her. It was around them. She had been holding the door closed from inside. Kethris bent to pick up his blade. His hands, all 4 of them, were trembling. She hadn't hurt him. She hadn't needed to. The tremor was chemical, hormonal. The neurological aftershock of having 10,000 years of warrior caste certainty replaced in 11 seconds by a single unambiguous data point. There were things in the galaxy that his culture's entire framework had no room for. Things that smiled at you and baked for you and sat in corners with heavy pens and 72 heartbeats per minute and could end you between one step and the next if you were stupid enough to invite them to. He sheathed the blade. He sat down. He did not look at Marin again. Marin wrote the date at the top of her notebook page. The pen moved across the paper, and the letters it made were not straight. Not her hands. Her hands were steady. She checked, flexing her fingers under the desk. The tremor was deeper than muscle. Somewhere in the place where she kept the version of herself she had just let out for 11 seconds. The version that spoke in her father's voice, and moved with her father's hands, and solved problems the way her father solved problems, completely, permanently, without a shoulder option. The letters were uneven. She didn't fix them. She stared at the page. The date stared back. Around her, the rune breathed again, but different now, rearranged. She clicked the pen one more time, for no reason, just to hear it. The disciplinary committee convened in the Collegium's administrative tower, a circular chamber with walls made of transparent composite that looked out onto the dead gray surface of the moon. 5 committee members, 5 species, none of them human. Instructor Poleth sat at a witness table with a data terminal displaying Marin's biometric readings on a screen large enough for the entire room to see. He had not slept. His 6 legs were doing the tremor thing, and he had stopped trying to make them quit. "Walk us through the moment of contact," said the committee chair, a Tessani diplomat whose scent glands were producing the particular aroma Poleth's species associated with formal anxiety. Poleth walked them through it. 3 steps, 50 milliseconds, pen to throat, blade on floor. He showed the data. Heart rate, the steady 72 that held through the entire confrontation like a metronome that did not care about context. He showed the deceleration, the drop to 68 at the moment of the challenge. He showed the recovery, back to 72 within 4 seconds of sitting down. The committee watched the numbers on the display. She was calmer during the confrontation than before it, said the Tesseni chair. Not a question. Yes. Silence. A Golhari committee member leaned forward. Old, scarred, a species that had been apex predators 3,000 years ago, before they engineered the aggression out of their genome and joined galactic civilization as something gentler. The Golhari looked at the heart rate data with 4 eyes that had seen a lot of things they wished they hadn't. She did not activate a fight response, the Golhari said. Her voice was low and rough, and carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. She activated a hunt response. Those are not the same thing. The room absorbed this. Clarify, said the Tesseni. The Golhari leaned back. Her scars caught the light. A fight response is reactive. Adrenaline, elevated heart rate, tunnel vision, panic channeled into action. Every species in this room has one. It is a survival mechanism. It keeps you alive long enough to escape. She paused. A hunt response is the opposite. The heart rate drops. The breathing slows. The higher cognitive functions do not shut down. They sharpen. The body becomes quiet because it is not trying to survive. It is trying to succeed. The target is not a threat to be escaped. The target is a problem to be solved. Another silence. Longer this time. She solved it, the Golhari said, in 11 seconds, and then she sat down and asked about the lecture. Poleth testified for 20 more minutes. He argued for leniency on both sides. He explained that the Cultural Practices Exemption, Article 9, had been written by committee members who were imagining Vethrani challenging Vethrani, or Vethrani challenging Golhari, or Tesseni, or any of the species that had been part of the galactic community for centuries. Species with known response profiles. Species whose violence had been studied and categorized and could be predicted and managed. No one had imagined a Vethrani challenging a Deathworld species. No one had considered what would happen when you pointed a ritualized blade at a creature whose evolutionary history was 200,000 years of persistence hunting, of chasing things across open terrain until they collapsed, of tracking prey for days across distances that other species couldn't conceive of being so relentlessly, patiently, impossibly enduring that the rest of Earth's megafauna had simply died rather than compete. Humans didn't fight to dominate, Poleth explained. Domination was a Vethrani concept. Hierarchy, submission, the careful calibration of who stood above whom. Humans fought to end. When a human engaged, the objective was not to establish rank. The objective was to make the problem stop existing. The committee ruled. Kethris Zosal received a formal censure, a mark on his academic record, a letter to his family. Marin Voss received a formal warning and mandatory cultural integration counseling. Both penalties were light. Both were political. The real ruling was the one nobody spoke aloud. The Cultural Practices Exemption was suspended for review, effective immediately. No formal announcement, no memo, just a quiet update to the Collegium's internal policy database that every faculty member would notice, and no student would be told about. No species filed a Quetzal challenge for the rest of the academic year. Marin sat in the counselor's office 3 days later. The counselor was Dathari, Kess's species, crystalline, delicate. The Collegium had assigned Marin a counselor made of glass, and she wasn't sure if this was irony or a test. The counselor asked how she was feeling about the incident. Marin described the cookie recipe. She went into detail. Flour to butter ratios, the importance of cold butter versus room temperature butter, the way chocolate chips behave differently at different altitudes, or in this case, different gravity levels because 0.6 G changed the way heat distributed through dough, and she'd had to adjust baking times by 9% to compensate. She talked about vanilla extract. She talked about the difference between brown sugar and white sugar. She talked for 11 minutes without pausing. The counselor let her. When Marin ran out of cookie facts, the counselor said nothing for a while. Then, would you like to talk about something else? Thank you, though. She meant it. That was the thing people didn't understand about her politeness. She always meant it. That evening she went to the library. The library was enormous, a cathedral of data terminals and physical texts from 100 worlds, shelves that curved with the moon's interior geometry, reading alcoves sized for species that ranged from hummingbird small to elephant large. Marin liked the library. It was the one place on Tethera where being quiet didn't feel like performance. She found a terminal in the back, pulled up her coursework, started reading. Tessif sat down next to her. No announcement, no greeting. The Palesi girl simply appeared. Bioluminescence dimmed to a soft ambient glow, and settled into the adjacent seat with the careful precision of someone who had thought about this and decided to do it anyway. They sat in silence for 10 minutes. Marin read. Tessith read. Their shoulders were 2 feet apart, which was close for a Palesi sitting next to a Class 7 Deathworld predator. Close enough that Marin could feel the faint warmth of Tessith's bioluminescence on her skin, a sensation so gentle it was almost imaginary. Can you teach me the cookie recipe? Tessith asked. Marin's hands stopped on the terminal keys. She looked at Tessith. The Palesi girl's luminescence was doing something Marin hadn't seen before. A slow pulse of soft blue that her xenobiology training identified as either deep trust or profound stupidity. She wasn't sure Tessith knew the difference. She wasn't sure it mattered. The answer took a long time coming. It traveled from somewhere deep, from the place below bone where the tremor lived, up through the mechanical architecture of her self-control, through the diplomatic mask, through the ambassador's daughter and the marine's daughter, and the girl who ate alone and baked at 3 in the morning and held everything so carefully that her hands never shook, even when her handwriting did. Yeah, Marin said. Her voice was small, smaller than she'd intended. Yeah, I can do that. Tessith's bioluminescence bloomed gold. That night, Marin sat on her bed. Her quarters were quiet. The gravity panels hummed their constant lullaby. The weight plate sat in the corner, stolen and ridiculous and necessary. She picked up the photo from the shelf. Her mother, her father, dress suit and dress blues, the diplomat and the weapon. Both of them smiling in the photo. Real smiles, the kind that reached the eyes, and both of them had given her something, and neither gift had an exchange policy. She didn't set the photo face down. She propped it against the lamp on her bedside shelf, angled so she could see it from her pillow. Her mother's smile, her father's hands, both hers, both real, both true. She looked at her own hand, the right one, the one that held the pen. She flexed it, opened and closed the fingers. Steady as bedrock. She wished it wasn't. She wished for the tremor, the real one, the one that meant something had cost her, the one that meant she was still the kind of person who shook after doing a hard thing. But her hand was her father's hand, and her father's hands never shook, and that was the inheritance she carried, alongside her mother's smile, and her mother's patience, and her mother's belief that you could hold a door open for the entire galaxy if you just stood there long enough and didn't let go. She lay back, stared at the ceiling. 0.6 G settled over her like a blanket made of nothing. Tomorrow, she would teach Tessith to bake cookies. She would measure flour in a kitchen that smelled like home. She would adjust for gravity. In his office, 4 corridors away and a world apart, Instructor Poleth sat at his desk and stared at his syllabus for next semester. He'd been staring at it for an hour. His antennae were flat. His legs were still. Typed the titles slowly, one character at a time, with the deliberate care of someone carving words into stone. Deathworld Diplomacy, when coexistence is the threat display. He looked at it. It wasn't enough. It didn't capture the thing, the impossible, contradictory, infuriating thing about the species that had just rewritten his understanding of what it meant to be dangerous and kind at the same time. He added a subtitle, or Why She Bakes Cookies. He saved the file, closed it, opened it, read the subtitle one more time. Then he turned off the display and sat alone in the quiet hum of a moon that had just learned, in 11 seconds and 3 steps and the click of a pen, that the scariest thing in the galaxy was not a predator. It was a predator that wanted to be your friend.